Would you please pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our God, our rock and redeemer. Amen. Okay, I'm going to run a little test this morning. Mike's going to project some images on the screen up there, and I want to see if you know what they are. So Mike, let's have the first one. Clothespin. And we've gone a long way from that clothespin to these dryers, which look like some kind of a space age thing, I think. Okay, Mike, next one. After people get over the laughter, yes, that is a cell phone. Imagine sticking that one in your pocket. This is the new iPhone 5. We've come a long way, haven't we? According to We're a Coffee Pot, how many of you actually have one of these still? Okay. Well, here's the more modern day, where you can make your latte or foam your milk right there in your home. Now, anyone know what this is? Oh, I'm impressed. Michael Jackson's Love. Next picture. You know, it's kind of iconic, isn't it, to see that? Okay. Benny Goodman, very good. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we had a couple different generations here of musicians. Yeah. Radio tubes, TV tubes. Dewey Decimal System. I remember going to the card catalogs. Now you go to a computer. That's a little harder to see. Dimmer switch, and where is it located? In the dark on the floor. This I needed to add just for Chuck. This is what he's driving now, and I love it. And what could you get with these little things? Pots and pans, dishes, silverware, blankets, all kinds of things. Been there, done that. But what did you do when you went there with that? Grain harvest, right? That in contrast to now. Air conditioned. Oh, this one's really hard to see. So if you, okay, sleeve tattoo. It's not just a tattoo, it's a sleeve tattoo. Now this last one I put up there, and if you can't see it, it's a little child, probably about 18 months, 2 years old, who's on the phone with his hand up on his head and he's saying, "Grandma, listen, double click on the Internet Explorer icon." I know it well. My son-in-law was complaining a couple of weeks ago that someone had taught his 2-year-old daughter how to get the pictures on his telephone and to play the videos. Oh, well. Well, things have really changed, haven't they? You know, just looking at the cell phones and what they were and what they are now. It's just amazing, the different inventions and improvements. Can you imagine your ancestors who was on the combine that was first shown versus the air-conditioned and keeping away from all the dust on the newer ones? They probably never even thought that that was a possibility. I've been reading a book called Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Say say that fast 3 times. The author, Dr. Ira Wolf, makes the case that the various generations, and there are 4 significant generations that we'll look at, can work together in the workplace, and though the work and where they're coming from, the ethics from which they are coming from, may differ, but all of that difference is neither right nor wrong. It just is. And we can coexist within generations, and it can be a good thing. And I thought, that could happen within the church, I bet. So let's take a moment and take a look at some of these generations. The first generation is called the GI generation. And that generation, people were born between 1900 and 1924. They came of age during the Great Depression and World War II, defining events. They had a good kid reputation. They were beneficiaries of new playgrounds, scouting clubs, and vitamins. Child labor restrictions, which prohibited child employment under the age of 14. The economy was during the Roaring 20s, and the national debt shrank from $24 billion to $16 billion during the 20s, and taxes were reduced. Their education had the sharpest rise in schooling ever recorded, and there were more teenagers in school than out of school. And they were raised as increasingly protected youth. Their attitudes were of formality. You wear suits and ties everywhere. Uniformity. It is good and normal for everyone to agree. Cooperative. You put your trust in the government, authority, and community. You are civic-minded. Leaders put public interest over personal gain. And it was the first generation that got to see the comic strip Superman. Next came the silent generation, born from 1925 to 1946. This generation grew up in the years following the Great Depression. Harsh economic climate taught them discipline and self-sacrifice. Over the course of their lives, this generation saw their affluence increase. They tend to be team players who are loyal to organizations. They have a huge knowledge legacy to share and a strong work ethic. The veterans, or the silents, they're called veterans sometimes, are known as the radio babies, the Schwarzkopf generation. The greatest generation, as coined by Tom Brokaw. They're traditional, mature, and about 95% of the silents are now retired. The boomer generation, born between 1946 and 1964. Boomers grew up in a time of unprecedented economic prosperity and post-war hopefulness. They were typically raised in nuclear families, most often with a stay-at-home mom. Boomers worked hard and were rewarded for it. They tend to be optimistic and driven by success. Because of their sheer numbers, they are the largest generation alive today. They have dominated the workforce for decades. Boomers excel in tackling issues and finding solutions. Generation X was born between 1965 and 1979. Divorce and working moms became the new normal for this generation. And many in this generation demonstrate characteristics of independence, resiliency, and flexibility. Gen Xers came of age during a major recession. They saw their parents laid off after decades of service. Many graduated from universities to find new jobs and opportunities. And as a result, Gen Xers became loyal, not to organizations, but rather to their work, or to their team, or their boss. Gen Xers thrive in situations that minimize rules and maximize flexibility and participation. They value feedback and are looking for meaning in their work. They are the 20-somethings, the baby busters, the 13th generation, and the latchkey generation. The Center for Religion and Civic, I forgot one of my C's on there, CRCC, let's say community, that sounds good, made this observation of young and otherwise conservative evangelical Christian Gen Xers who were sporting tattoos with significant religious and spiritual content. These Gen Xers had appropriated the popular cultural form of tattooing as a way to publicly announce their identity as Christians. When you look at tattoos, look and see what they say. Are they identifying themselves as belonging to something? The next generation is called the Millennial or Generation Y. And the reason it's called Generation Y is because they're always asking why. There are no particular dates given to this generation. Somewhere in the 1970s to the 1990s they were born. Raised in a child-centric world, this generation has been showered with attention and held in high regard by the adults in their lives. As a result, they are self-confident and achievement-oriented. Technology has surrounded them from birth, and they are more techno-savvy than any other previous generation. Their parents involved them in many social activities and sports and school activities, and they are masters in multitasking. They thrive in teams and expect structure. They are known as the net generation, ENET, the debt generation. And members of Generation Y are less likely to practice organized religion in older generations. And they are more likely to be skeptical of religious institutions. What does all of that mean to us? Well, how religion and culture changes across the generations will determine how we worship together and how we work together as a congregation. For example, how has the needs and desires for religious and spiritual experiences changed over the course of your life? And how are these changes different? You may have started out in a Sunday school where you were taught about the Garden of Eden and that there was this great big flood and animals went into an ark. And it was pretty simplistic at that point in your life. But then as you grew and you matured, those stories take on new meaning. Because faith is not stagnant. It isn't something that it's this way when you're 2 years old and the same way when you're 80. Here I want to become a true Methodist for a few moments as I bring to you the quadrilateral. Albert Outler, who was a scholar, Wesleyan scholar, coined the phrase the quadrilateral after studying John Wesley's works. And Outler said that Wesley had 4 distinctive ways of making decisions and of ordering his life. The first and the primary is Scripture. If you have been raised as a Methodist or in a similar Protestant denomination, again, you may have understood Scripture as the Garden of Eden, the flood, Christmas gifts, Santa Claus, Jesus dying on the cross, and new Easter clothes. It's just kind of the cycle that we go through. But as you matured in your faith, you learn more about the prophets and the birth of Jesus and the purpose. If you came from a Pentecostal background, your learnings would be, again, totally different. And if you weren't raised in a home that valued religion, then you are starting from an absolutely new place in life. Tradition. Do you have turkey on Thanksgiving or lasagna? Do you eat lutefisk or smoked oysters? Did your family go to the 7 o'clock Christmas Eve service or the 11 o'clock or both? My maternal grandparents were Czechoslovakian. The traditions Grandma brought to the family most likely were different from my paternal grandparents who were born in the United States. I didn't know my paternal grandparents, but I'm sure that their traditions were very different. The tradition you were raised in, the part of the country that you came from, all make a difference on how you see life and how you view your religion and your spirituality. Experience. Did you live in a house where your aunts and uncles lived with their children too? Or were you an only child? Were you raised in Southern California and had warm winters and never knew what a snowstorm was? Your experience might be rooting for the Seahawks, or it might be rooting for the Packers. I have to tell you about something I saw on Facebook yesterday. It just saddened me. How many of you are Seahawk fans? Okay, how many are Packer fans? Okay, so there's this cheese grater, and the cheese grater has the Seahawks symbols around it, and then sitting there is a pile of cheese all shredded with a big G. The Seahawks shredded the Packers. Watch the game tomorrow night, let's see. Your experience matters. And reason. You know, United Methodists are encouraged to think for themselves. It's a good thing to believe in substitution, atonement theory, as long as it's a good thing for you to accept that someone else may not believe in substitution atonement theory. And don't ask me to explain that without a cup of coffee first. Some believe in the moral influence theory of atonement. The point being, we get to think about it, and we get to decide for ourselves. No one stands up here and says, this is what you have to believe to be a Christian. And if you don't believe this, you're not going to heaven. We all get to use our brains. What a long way to say that we are different. We are geeks and geezers and Googleization. But you know what? We can coexist and learn from one another. And we can become richer for it. Organization and institutional questions are always going to be important. How religious congregations both adapt to the demands from younger and older constituents, as well as how they maintain consistency with their own traditional practices, are important areas for us as a congregation to tackle. One generation might want to sing Fanny Crosby songs, or Charles Wesley or Isaac Watts. Another generation listens to Stryper, Jars of Clay, or Audio Adrenaline. Those are band names, just in case. Christian band names. In 2004, Donald Miller and Father James Heft received a grant from the Lilly Foundation for a project that investigated how religious identity was constructed across generations within 4 major religious traditions: Islam, Judaism, Catholicism, and Protestant Christianity. It resulted in a book called Passing Our Faith. And one of the chapters in the book is called Congregations That Get It: Understanding Religious Identities in the Next Generation. Do we get it? Do we get that we have 4 generations in our midst in our worship this morning? And each one of us is coming from a differing life circumstance? Do we get it that a person with a sleeve tattoo, multiple piercings, and a bald head can love God just as much as the person wearing the suit and tie and high heels? Do we understand that whether or not you've been a member of the church for 40 years, or this is the 4th time you walked into the building, that we are all here to do the same thing, to worship God and to make disciples of Jesus Christ? It doesn't mean that we change everything we do overnight, but isn't it okay to challenge our spirituality by going outside of our comfort zone so that someone else can worship in their way too? The Finance and Stewardship Committee is asking every person to fill out a pledge card. And you are asked to fill out not only your financial commitment to the church for the year 2013, which is absolutely crucial to the health of our church, but you are being asked for your commitment by your prayers, presence, service, gifts, and witness. Are you willing to pray for this church? Are you willing to be here, to come to worship and make it a priority? Will you serve? The nominations committee will be meeting this week. Will you serve this church? Will you witness? Will you tell folks, you've got an auction coming up? Sure like to have you come to it. But here I would like to also insert an alert. When we ask someone to serve on a committee, we aren't asking them to be the muscle behind the way things have always been done. We are asking for and celebrating the gifts that others bring to our table, to their table. We are an experiment in a multi-generational living and worshiping community. The prophet Joel said, I will pour out my spirit on every kind of people. Your sons will prophesy, and your daughters. Your old men will dream dreams, and young men will see visions. Where would we be without the dreams of the greatest generation? Where would we be without the visions of the millennial generation? when we live and worship together as a community of diverse and wonderful creatures of God, our lives will be enriched. And here is the promise that we receive from God. I'll even pour out my Spirit on the servants, men and women both. I'll set wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below. And the people of God said, Amen. As you are able, if you would please stand, and we will sing, Here I Am, Lord.